So, hey everyone, we're here to talk about how you can elevate your developer experience with automatic SDK generation. Quick question from PK. What does SDK stand for? Software Developer Kit. So we'll be going through this a little bit more as we go through the session, but great question. So folks, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. I won't necessarily be able to answer them myself, but I've got my team on standby to answer any of your questions. And I'm actually going to start by asking you a question. So I'd like you all to jump in the chat and answer me some questions. So first of all, who here creates APIs? So put something in the chat. Yeah, thumbs up, something if you create APIs. So if your company is a SaaS platform that sells an API, or if you build microservices that are used internally. So just drop something in the chat if you do. Sharon dabbles. So everyone else drop in the chat. Yep, Vuong gives me a thumbs up. Stefan, thumbs up. Okay, so some of you create APIs. Now, on the other side of things, who consumes APIs? So again, give me a thumbs up in the chat if you use APIs. You are either using an API from a company, like a product that you're using, or you're consuming microservices or other internal APIs. Okay, thumbs up from Sharon, thumbs up from Jeff, another thumbs up from Vuong. Okay, so some folks use APIs, some folks create APIs. Now, when it comes to accessing an API, there's kind of two ways you can do it. You can either hit the API directly, so you can call into a REST API, or you can use an SDK or some other layer of abstraction that wraps that API for you. So just drop in the chat if you're team API or team SDK. Just put API or SDK. Do you like to use REST APIs directly, or do you like to use SDKs? So just drop that in the chat. I'm intrigued to know. Sharon is team SDK. David is SDK. Anyone else in team SDK? Andres, SDK. Nice. So I am team SDK. I struggle with APIs. I like an SDK to make my life easier. So who am I? I'm Jim Bennett. I'm a principal developer advocate at Liblab. Now, I'm all over the internet at Jim Bob Bennett. So if you want to reach out after this session, you want to connect with me on social, or you have questions from anything I talk about today, please feel free to reach out. So Twitter, Jim Bob Bennett, github.com, Jim Bob Bennett, YouTube at Jim Bob Bennett, LinkedIn, Jim Bob Bennett. Please connect with me. Any questions you have today, I'd love to help you. And I'm always up for geeking out on tech with people. So let's talk about the developer experience with APIs. Now, obviously, I'm asking you about APIs versus SDK. I'm kind of leading somewhere with this. So let's actually look at what the developer experience is when you're working directly with an API and some of the pitfalls that you get when you do it. So let's just jump straight into a demo. I have got an API here. This is my llama store. So if anyone's ever used the Swagger pet store, it's like that, just with a few more llamas. We're all about the llamas here at Liblab. And so I've got an API here. I've got some docs. Created this with Fast API. It's given me docs. And my docs tell me what I have to do. To register a user, send a post request with some JSON. To get an API token, send a post request with some JSON. And then use the API token. And then I can do things like get a list of llamas. So let's actually do that. I've got some code here. It's Python code. And I'm going to just hit the API directly and try and see if I can register a user. So I'm going to my demos. I'm going to run my first demo. Bang, straight away I get an error. This doesn't look like there's anything wrong with my code. There's no red squigglies, but I'm getting an error. And I'm getting an error because I'm missing the email field. And so this is kind of where we start hitting some of those problems with APIs, in that I have to read the docs. Now, I don't know about you, I don't read the docs. I am terrible about reading the docs, which is ironic because I spend a big chunk of my working life writing the docs. But I'm terrible about reading docs. In this case, I have not read the docs properly. I'm creating a user with username and password, and I don't know this is wrong until the API throws an exception. Go back to docs. Oh, it's email. Okay, so let's go and create a user. Let's do email. Email, and we'll have llama@liblab.com. Now I run this again. Yay, it works. So that's kind of the first thing. Where I'm sending JSON, I'm relying on sending strings. The compiler does not help me if I'm wrong, and the linter can't help me if I'm wrong because it doesn't know. I have to read the docs. Okay, next thing, let's actually get some llamas. And to get llamas, I need an API token, and then I can use that to get my llamas. So, reading the docs a bit more here. And I'm going to create an API token. I've got my token request, and I've read the docs. Jim was good. Jim read the docs, and I know it's email and password. So let's just try this out. Make sure this is not complaining. Oh, yeah, okay. I can get a token. Nice. Now what I'm going to do is use my token. So it says here, my token goes in the authorization header. Okay, right. I've got my token here. Authorization header. Spare auth. Got the token that's coming back. I'm going to set this as a header, and I'm going to get some llamas. Okay, let's run this. Could not validate credentials. So another error. Okay, what's the error? What's wrong with my credentials? So let's maybe try having a look at the credentials that I've got back. Okay, my credentials is actually an object. So when I access the API token, it's an object. I have to work out what that is. So actually what I need is the access token field off there. And all this, it looks like I'm doing some dumb coding here, but really this is the kind of experience you get when you're working directly with an API. You have to read the docs. There's nothing here to help me do a better job. I have to look at the docs. I look at the docs. Oh yeah, my token here is an access token with a token type. Okay. And these docs are not bad, but if the docs are terrible, I've got no hope. And again, let's just try and get one llama. Let's run my code to get one llama. Not authenticated because I forgot to set the headers. As Sagiv says in the chat there, who reads the docs? Not me. I write them, I just don't ever read them. But again, this case here, it doesn't work because I forgot to set the headers. Yeah, I know it looks like me doing some dumb coding, but these are the kind of silly mistakes that it's really easy to make when you're using an API. These are the kind of mistakes folks make all the time. And let's be honest, we're not going to be using this API directly pretty much ever. What we're going to do is we're going to look at this and we're probably going to build some form of layer of abstraction over this API. I've got this token response here. It's actually an object. I'm probably going to build an object for that. When I get a llama, some JSON, I'm probably going to build an object for that. When it comes to managing headers, I'm probably going to put a layer of abstraction over the top so that I can set my token once and then never have to set it again. And this is code that I have to write. And if there's multiple people using an API, they will all have to write this layer of abstraction. If it's an internal API, I've got 10 teams using it, they're all going to write this layer of abstraction. If it's an external API, every one of my customers is going to have to write this layer of abstraction. And that's not great. And as Sharon says, and these mistakes flood servers. So if you're constantly making mistakes as you're trying to code against the REST API, it's going to hit servers. I found that just playing with ChatGPT using the REST API, I end up spending real money because I'm getting the things wrong, because I'm not reading the docs. Maybe my own fault. But that's the kind of experience you get with an API. And the biggest thing you get is too many magic strings. Now, magic strings, the term's kind of gone out of favor really recently, but essentially it means you have a string in your code that actually affects the flow of code. This could be the name of a field in a JSON object. It could be a URL, but these magic strings are not anything that can be checked by a compiler. They are there in your code, and they can really, if they're wrong, they can make you make mistakes. Too many magic strings. So my JSON objects have magic strings in them. And this is the kind of thing you're likely to build a layer of abstraction over. And it's too easy to make these silly mistakes. The compiler can't help me. The linter can't help me. I just have to run it and wait till runtime and find the errors. Really not ideal. So how do devs normally fix this? As I said, we fix this by building a layer of abstraction. That's the standard way of doing it. And the best cure for a layer of abstraction that's not great is to add another layer of abstraction. It's like turtles, layers of abstraction all the way down. But we build these layers of abstraction. We will abstract away the objects, the URLs, try and hide these magic strings, make sure this layer of abstraction works so we can reuse it, and just spend a lot of time investing in this layer of abstraction. And what is the best layer of abstraction for an API? It's an SDK. Building a high quality SDK that sits on top of an API really gives you that high quality level of abstraction. You can take all your request and response objects and create actual strongly typed objects out of that. You can build all the serialization layer to go from JSON to object and object to JSON. And then you can build methods, functions that will call the API and pass this data around. And you can do this once, hard coding those URLs that you know once, and then you've got a working SDK. Now, when you talk about this in any company, oh, your API, you need a layer of abstraction, you need an SDK. Usually folks come up with two big questions. It's like, yeah, it's great, Jim. I have questions. What are these questions? And the first question is actually, well, should I really bother? Imagine you are a software as a service platform. You have an API. Should I really bother building an SDK for my customers? They can just build it themselves. Why should I bother? It's a lot of work. Why should I bother doing this? And the answer is actually yes, because your customers want a better developer experience. If you're a SaaS platform, you're charging hundreds of dollars a month for your application. Anyone who's coding against that wants a good developer experience. If your internal team making microservices, you want to give the users in the company a good developer experience because you don't want them telling your boss's boss's boss what a poor experience they've got. Minor help with promotions. And the great thing about adding this developer experience through an SDK is it doesn't take anything away from your REST API. For those who want to use REST APIs, they still can. Those who want to use SDKs, they still can. You've kind of got this ability. And the thing is, your customers don't care how much work this is. Your customers want what they want. They don't care how much work this is for you. It doesn't matter how much work it is. Customers are like, I want this. And if you don't give it, maybe I'll go somewhere else. And actually, I did a not particularly scientific survey a few months ago, just out on Twitter, just asking for a few votes on would you rather code directly against the REST API or use an SDK for the language you're in? So REST calls, or if you're in Python, write in Python. If you're in Go, write in Go. And .NET, write in C#. And it came back 56% said SDK. Now, not a scientific survey. I imagine a lot of the REST API folks could be front-end developers where REST is kind of used a lot more. But at least 56% said, I want an SDK. I know it says, please retweet for trash. Spelling mistake. It should be retweet for reach. I'm not saying anything here is trash. But this is the response I got. 56% of developers want an SDK. And that's not an insubstantial quantity of people. So that's the majority of people. So how do we get those? And why do we get those? And the reason people want SDKs is because we live in a time of better developer experience. If we think about the different periods throughout the technology lifecycle, we've gone from, let's just get things working on mainframes. Then we brought it back to the desktop. Then we've taken it to the cloud. We've introduced mobile. And there's all these technologies out there. But now the biggest growing technology space is developer experience. The existence of Docker is to improve pretty much developer experience. GitHub Copilot, Cursor.sh, all these different tools are here to make developers more productive. And that's what we want. We want to get on and build our amazing application to prove once and for all that pineapple is perfect on pizza. We don't want to have to deal with boilerplate code. We want a lot of this stuff done for us. We want to have a great developer experience so we can build applications quickly and solve the real problems, not let's just write another layer of abstraction. Yay. So the next question that comes up is, doesn't it take ages to build an SDK? I mean, it can, but why? We have tools to help. We live in this time of better developer experience. And one of the ways we have great developer experience is through tools that can build SDKs. You don't have to think of hand building in multiple languages, one engineer whose job it is to build the Java SDK and is a Java expert, and another engineer who's a Go expert to build a Go SDK. We've got tools to do this. You think about the time scale for building an SDK, multiply that by the languages support you want, by then the updates you have to do. Gargantuan task, but no, let's just use tools for it. Because let's be honest, I'm lazy. I'm sure most of you probably are lazy. We automate all the things. And actually, as developers, we're that special breed of lazy, where instead of doing a boring 20-minute task, we will spend 10 hours automating it, because that's just how we rock. Yes, but we automate all the things. So when it comes to SDK generation, not just generating the initial SDK, but updates, we want to automate all these things. And in my particular case, I love to use a tool called Liblab, because, hey, I work for Liblab. We're awesome. But Liblab is an SDK generator. It can take your API and it can spit out SDKs in the programming language that you're interested in. So you know what? Let's just see this in action. Let's give Liblab a spin. So I've got I have my API running at the moment, and I've got in here an OpenAPI spec. Simple browser is not the best way to view it. So let's actually bring up the OpenAPI spec. So I've got my OpenAPI spec. OpenAPI is one of the standards for providing a specification for your API. We also support Postman collections and all manner of other different formats. But this is a way of specifying your API. You can define the endpoints in here. So we've got llama's got get, and then you can define the objects. This is what a llama looks like. We've got examples, name, age, color, all the properties of your llama object. So this defines the API, and this is what feeds into that documentation. So when I have my documentation here, for example, this is generated from my API spec. So any good API, you should have an API spec. And then you combine that API spec with a configuration file. So Liblab runs off configuration. We have a file that tells Liblab what options you need for your SDK generation. So, what's your SDK called? Where is the spec? Is it local one? Is it remote? What programming language do you want to generate? Do you have authentication? And there's a whole load of other options that you can do to kind of configure this. We do this in a configuration file because we don't want you to have to pollute your spec. This way you can take a spec from a third party, not have to put configuration in the spec, do it in a config file, bring the two together, spit out an SDK. So let's actually do that. Let's just go in here, and I'm going to actually create an SDK right now. We're on Liblab build. This is going to take my spec, my configuration file, and generate me, in this case, Python and TypeScript SDKs. So let's run that. They released an update. Just going to update to the latest version of Liblab, and I'm going to build it. So this will go off. First of all, it's going to validate my API spec. It's going to go through everything I've got, and then it's going to go and build these SDKs. So that's building. That should be fairly quick, and that should spit out SDKs for me. So I'm just in Python and TypeScript. Shouldn't take very long at all. And then when I've got these, let's actually explore what comes out. Okay, got my SDKs built. And that's just preparing my TypeScript SDK, and then everything's going to be downloaded. There we go, done. Pretty quick. And that gives me my output folder. It gives me a Python and a TypeScript SDK. It's all strongly typed for my objects that I've got. So for example, I mentioned llama. I've got my llama here. ID, rating, color, age, and name. And that's the same as, oh, where's my spec? Let's open my spec. Oh. If I go to my spec, for example, my llama, name, age, color, rating, ID. So it's kind of there matching my spec. And that's pretty quick. So we've got the SDKs generated in really quick time. We've taken our spec, we've taken our configuration, and we've got an SDK generated. We can now use this in our applications. And this isn't just an SDK for your customers. If you are in like a SaaS company, you're selling an API, this is not just an SDK for your customers. This could be something internal. It could be you're using a third-party API and you want to create an SDK for it. It could be you're in a team using microservices that are available internally, and you're the first team to use C# and you need a C# SDK. Kind of anyone can use this to point to any API and generate an SDK based off the API and based on the configuration file. Let's actually see this in use. Let's take this SDK and explore that developer experience that we get with an SDK. So I've come over here, I've got my SDK. I just need to, I'm doing this in Python, so I just need to actually compile and deploy my my Python code. Install llama, install Python. So it's Python. I'm just going to build the wheel and then deploy that into my current environment. So I've got it there to use. Cool. That's now deployed. And so if I go in here, here is some code, and let's explore the experience that I get when I'm using an SDK. So let's start by creating a user. Okay, so I've got my llama store, and as soon as I hit dot, I get everything that's available. So I've kind of got this type safety, and I've got IntelliSense helping me. I don't have to read the docs. Okay, I want user. Dot. Register user. Done. What does register user take? It takes a user registration object. Okay, user reg. User registration. What do I pass? Email and password. Cool. Ooh. Email is llama2 at liblab.com. Password is llama123. That'll do. And so I'm not going to necessarily make this. I'm not going to make the same mistakes I made last time where I passed a username first, because IntelliSense is helping me. I've got my type. Right, I want a token. Okay. API token. Token equals llama store dot token dot create API token. That takes an API token request. Token request equals API token request. Email equals user reg dot email. You know, I've got this IntelliSense that's helping me. I can do this. It gives me a token. Right. I need to set my token somewhere. You know, before I had to put on every single header, every single request. Okay, what do? Oh, set access token. The SDK is helping me. Set access token takes string. My token is an object. Okay, how do I get a string out of this? Oh, there's an access token field. Yep, bit of a contrived example, but this is kind of experience I've got. I'm not reading the docs. IntelliSense is helping me. So I can do llamas equals llama store dot llama dot get llamas. You know, and then for llama and llamas, let's print the llama name, for example. Again, IntelliSense is helping me every single step of the way. But let's run this. There's my list of llamas. So I'm not having to rely on magic strings. I'm not having to read the docs. I literally press dot and I get everything that's there. I can hover over it and see what things do. If I bothered to put more documentation everywhere, I better see the documentation in IntelliSense. Everything is there for me to really start building applications very, very quickly. So my developer experience is now at the next level after, literally just a few seconds of generating things. And then once generated, I can just publish this SDK. SDKs are great, but you need to make them available. You've seen me take 30 seconds to build one. I mean, being realistic, I'm using a config file that I know. Real world, I would probably fire up a basic config file, generate SDK, test it out, then probably configure some of the options. We have a whole lot of options to configure. Configure those, build SDK, test it, configure, build, test it. Spend a couple of hours, maybe a lazy morning with a few coffee breaks, getting it sorted, and then I can just publish this SDK. And stick it up on GitHub for everyone to use. And once again, I'm lazy. I automate all the things. I'm not going to publish this myself. I'm not going to just copy the code to GitHub. I'm going to get a tool to do it for me for that kind of better developer experience. And the tool in question is Liblab. There's a PR command on Liblab, and that will take my code and put it in GitHub. In fact, let me just bring another window over here. Let's just bring this up. github.com/liblabber/llama store. In fact, you know what? Let's just go llama store. This is my llama store. I have got a GitHub workflow in here that looks for if my spec is updated, it'll install the Liblab CLI, build my SDK, and then raise a pull request. And if I actually zip back here, and I just go llama store SDK Python, this is the kind of pull request we get. So we get this lovely pull request created with the updates to my SDK. So it's all automated as much as possible. All very nice, all very lovely. Okay, so what do we got? We've got maximum developer experience, minimum developer effort. And yet Mark says, I'm lazy too. Yes, team lazy. I love being lazy. But that's what you get. You get this amazing developer experience with, realistically not that much effort.